your sound is good, your mix sounds okay, but when you compare it to pro tracks on Spotify and in playlists and such, it just doesn't sit right. Vocal sounds a bit off, you don't know where to start when you're mixing, and it's overprocessed. Now, if you keep on watching, I'm going to share with you 3 things that you can do right now, today, to make your mixes sound a lot more release ready and pro. Let's go. I've helped a lot of people make their mixes sound better, and one of the things that goes again and again and again is that the vocals doesn't sit quite right. Either they're muffled and masked by the instrumental or the other parts of the mix, or they're too loud, or sometimes there are syllables or words that just gets lost in the mix. And here are some fixes for that, and you can do this right now today. So the first thing that you do is you make sure that your vocals is properly compressed. And the first thing you do to ensure this is to use clip gain automation. And it's really simple. You just cut out a part of your vocal track and then you lower or raise the volume of that part. And then you go on, and you only do this to the extremes. So you see here are a couple of extreme bites of the vocals. That's where the vocalists are shouting, or there are some extreme lows. That's where the vocalists are whispering or is mumbling, or I don't know what it is. And then you just turn that up a bit, but don't go too far. A couple of dBs goes a long way. Now the next thing you do is apply a compressor, and I like to do this in series, so I use 2 compressors. I usually use an 1176 style compressor first and then an LA2A style after. But for rap vocals, I like to use a Tube Tech or another 1176, but with slightly different settings. So I use a fast attack and a medium release at the first one, and at the second one, I use a slower attack and a faster release. The fewer elements you have in the mix, the less you need to do with the vocals, but you need to make sure that it's compressed sufficiently. Now, the next thing I typically do with the vocals is automating. So I can automate the volume up or down according to whatever happens elsewhere in the mix. And as a general rule of thumb, the more elements that you have in the mix, the more processing you need for the vocals to cut through the mix. I like to use the vocal rider from Waves. I also like to do it manually using my Fader Port 2 from PreSonus. You can check out, there's a video about it right there. It's really convenient for doing manual automation or vocal rides. Next up is sidechain compressing certain instruments to the vocal, so that whenever the vocal is active, you compress or clamp down, or you turn down in volume, sort of, some of the elements of the mix. And that's typically the elements that are interfering with the vocals, such as, for example, guitars, piano, and sometimes even the bass can interfere with the intelligibility of the vocals. Oftentimes I mix with only a 2-track stereo beat. What I've typically done then is using the track spacer from Waves Factory. With this plugin, you can sidechain compress only the mids, and you can also select which frequency band you want to compress. So you can leave the bass alone, for example. You can leave the top alone. But with the new stem separation features, for example, in Logic or in Lander or wherever you find them, in Isotope, you can also stem split a stereo beat, and you can apply sidechain compression to the parts that you feel are the most important to push away from the vocals. There's one more thing that I can do with the vocals to make them sound more intelligible and cut through the mix. And this goes for really dense mixes where there's like a lot of piercing synths. Whenever it's chaotic and the vocals still needs to cut through, I can apply some saturation. I can do this in parallel. For example, here in this template right here, I have a parallel setting. This is one of my paid templates, but you can set this up. It's really easy. You just route it into an aux, and you make sure the aux goes to the right place. Saturate the heck out of that, and then you can blend it in with the original sound. Or you can use any saturator. In Logic, you have the Chroma Glow, for example, and you can use the wet dry knob, and you basically get the same effect, but it's not that flexible. Yeah, so those are some tips for making the vocals cut through the mix. All right, next up is not knowing where to start in a mixing session. So you have exported all your tracks from your previous session and then you import it into a mixing session. I have a free mixing template that you can download. It's in the description below. I really recommend using a mixing template, either the one that I provide or one that you make yourself. I have made a video right there about how to make your very own mixing template in any DAW. So you drag it into a mixing template and then you arrange the tracks. I always have drums first, then bass, then instruments in the order of importance, and then finally the vocals, lead vocals first and background vocals last. And then I have everything rooted into subgroups and then rooted into a Mixbus. Now from here, there are many things that you can do. What I typically do is I just make a rough balance. I listen to some reference tracks and I figure out what is the best setting here for the drums, for the vocals, for the instruments, for the bass. I usually use the subgroups to get a rough balance. And if I hear that anything is off, like the hi-hat is too loud or something, I'll go into the individual track and turn it down. It's that easy. And most importantly is not to overthink this. Like, you have to do it in 5 minutes. So set a timer if that's what's needed. And then you go to the Mixbus and you start with an EQ, experiment with the EQ, what sounds good, what sounds bad, and then you make some basic EQ settings, and then you move on to a compressor, just compress it slightly with a slow attack and a fast release and 1 or 2 dB of gain reduction. And then finally use a saturator plugin of some sort and add some grit to the sound so that you get a more cohesive wholeness. And from there, you can listen back and listen to the reference and listen what needs to be done next. Do I need some reverb here, some delay there? Maybe something is too dynamic, so you want to compress it. Maybe something is too muddy, so you need to cut with an EQ. From that point on, listen back to the track. Take note of 3 things that you want to fix or improve. Do those 3 things. Stop there, listen back to the track, write down 3 more things. And I gotta give a shout out to UBK for giving me these tips way back when he had the podcast, UBK Happy Fun Time Hour. I remember him giving me that tip back then and I've used it ever since. Really nice tip. All right, so here's a rough breakdown of the workflow. Import your tracks to a mixing template, arrange the tracks in the correct order, start making a rough balance using the subgroups, make small tweaks on the individual channels. If you hear something that is completely off, use a reference track so that you have some anchoring, and then go to the Mixbus, apply EQ, compression, and saturation, and mix from there. Only fixing 3 things at a time. And when you run out of things to fix, you're done. Now, the last problem I'm gonna address is overprocessing, and it's when you're completely lost in your mix. And many of the people that I've worked with, they have mixing sessions that makes their CPU cry out, and it's beginning to go slower, and everything is. And everything is like when you hit play, you have to wait 3 seconds before it starts playing. And that's a sign that you have too many plugins on your mix. If you have more than 6 plugins on a channel, it's a red flag. Not necessarily wrong, but you absolutely need to reconsider. When I've guided people in mixing, I've just asked them to turn off all the plugins, bounce everything out, and import afresh into a new template. And then you proceed with the procedure from the previous section. Now, in my mixing templates, I have all the plugins bypassed by default so that you can just engage a plugin one at a time and make sure that you get the most out of each and every plugin. And this is particularly hard if you've invested $200 or $300 in a plugin. You feel that you have to use it all the time. It's true. I hope you implement some of these principles today. I hope this helped. And if you need custom help with your mixes and masters, you can work with me one-on-one. Go check out the description down below for more information and how to apply for that. And if you want more videos about tips and tricks on how to mix, go check out one of these videos. Hope I see you there. Thanks so much for watching. Peace out.